Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Reese Orman, the CEO of NeuroGlow, and with me today is our lead integrative therapist, Trevor Bidstrup. Trevor, how are you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us again. Another great session here as we were thinking about content to put together. This really stood out as a topic that I thought that our audience could really gain a lot of value from. So for everyone today, the goal is we're going to talk about getting the most out of your ketamine assisted therapy treatments post-treatment, right? And the lifestyle enhancements that you can do, nutrition, sleep, exercise, all that kind of good stuff. And so, yeah, with no further ado, I will let you take it from here, Trevor.
Yeah, of course. Part of I guess the motivation for doing this one for me at least was, I came from an educational background that's more holistic and naturopathic. And so it often emphasizes a lot of the more physical health, kind of biological health factors as it relates to our mental health. And that's kind of what I want to dive into a little bit today. I know oftentimes when people start treatment, it can be difficult to make changes to their physical health or to their lifestyle. But hopefully, as you're going through this treatment, you're feeling a little bit better. And my goal in sharing all this information today is to kind of aid you in that endeavor to kind of further improve your life and optimize results, everything like that. But
Yeah.
let's go ahead and get started. You know me, I always like to start with a quote. I'm a big fan of this one by William James, who is considered the godfather of psychology, at least in the Western world. He said, if you can change your mind, you can change your life. I thought that was a fitting quote going into this conversation about lifestyle changes. But the reason why I'm sharing it in conjunction with the ketamine treatments is because for about 2 weeks, there's some debatable research here, but roughly for about 2 weeks after each infusion, there's a unique window of opportunity whereby new neural pathways are being forged in the brain. This means there's a really unique opportunity for you to start changing aspects of your day-to-day life in ways that can help sustain the progress you make into the future and allow you to live your life at its fullest potential. And so my goal today is to kind of dive into some of those key areas that you might be able to change and to give you some information as to how to change them. So the areas that we'll be diving into today, I kind of consider these to be, especially in today's day and age, the kind of foundational building blocks of wellness. We have nutrition, we have sleep, we have exercise. And I thought it was fitting, given the world that we live in today, to also talk a little bit about technology and how all of these things can influence our health. And I'm going to be kind of walking through, interestingly, the United States has some official guidelines for all of these categories. Certainly, they're not the number one best, and other parts of the world might, debate some of them. But my goal is to share at least what the basic guidelines are to have somewhere to shoot towards. And then I'll supplement each of those with a little bit more information that might be interesting. But let's go ahead and get started with the nutrition. We'll work our way through these. Some people might remember, at least when I was a kid, it was the food pyramid is what we used to see. But in today's day and age now, America has upgraded. Now we have the MyPlate system, which is what we're currently using as a country. Um, it's interesting because the first thing that stood out to me when I was going through this is realizing my own shortcomings in my own diet and things that I could probably change to improve further. But one important part of this is to consider that according to at least the USA guidelines, half of your plate, so half of the food you consume is encouraged to be fruits and vegetables, which I know I certainly do not meet that requirement every single day. They also explain that about half of the grains you consume should try to be whole grains, ideally. And previously, they used to always have dairy be a major category. It still is today, but they also further and add that there's alternative substitutions to that, like nut milks or soy milks or things like that. They add an additional qualifier that they're shooting for people to go for low to no fat dairy, mostly because a lot of the other foods that we have are high in fat today. They also encourage less sugar, less salt, less saturated fat. I'm sure as I'm saying this, everybody's like, yeah, that makes intuitive sense. Now, the reason why I'm being quite vague and kind of bird's eye view with all of this is just because with NeuroGlow, there also is a nutritionist that's partnered working with us. And she's probably going to be more
Yeah.
experienced and
Yeah. And
specialized than myself.
yeah, that's a great call out, Trevor, because we do actually, Paula's excellent. We do content with her as well. There's some sessions on our YouTube channel you can check out about this. And you mentioned it at the beginning of this slide here, many of us not to date ourselves, but we're children of that food pyramid, right? And instructed
Yeah.
on some very outdated and archaic kind of frameworks. And so it is really good to revisit this. And the high level thing that you hit on, Trevor,
Mhm.
is that what we see with our patients is that they are starting to feel better. They're starting to think differently about these things that they've been through, and this is just such a great tipping point to further instill these other changes, right? And so definitely, if you're a patient of NeuroGlow, meet with our nutritionist Paula, review these things, evaluate it. Just a huge part of this, just overall, as I've taken more note of my own health and wanting to have good quality of life as I age, reducing the sugar intake, right? And some of those things for me is something I've been mindful of and has actually been measurably better for me, like less inflammation, better, mobility in my joints, that sort of thing, when I was more intentional about water and the things I was putting in my body, right? So tons to do there and something we can all benefit from. And, if you're already on this road to self-improvement, man, this is a huge area that you could put a little mental bandwidth in and get some outcome, right?
Exactly right. And even like the last 2 points on there, it talks about glasses of water and calories, as I put stars next to that. And that's really where having a conversation with somebody specialized and with expertise in this area is going to be helpful because all of this advice is pretty generalized and it can be generally accepted, but at the same time, everybody is different. And so having somebody that can actually tailor a meal plan or give you some specific advice to either meet shortcomings in your nutrition or to kind of maximize other areas that might further wellness, that's going to be super helpful having those conversations with somebody that's highly knowledgeable in that. Everything I'm sharing is kind of just a bird's eye view.
Yeah.
And for anybody watching this that might be feeling a little bit discouraged, just know that 75% of Americans do not consume any fruit day to day. So you're among many others. And kind of an interesting fact, I thought over half of Americans suffer from some kind of diet-related chronic condition. And so that's kind of why I chose to share the nutrition slide first. Is because if there was something to change, this is a really solid kind of first place to begin with, is try to change your diet. If we're talking about how we actually make this change, like what do we actually do? This is again where I'm going to kind of provide more bird's eye, more therapy angled advice, whereas the nutritionist will be able to go a little bit more in depth with all of this. But the best advice I've heard is, and kind of from more of a psychological side, is it can be daunting to go to the store and pick out a whole new cart of all new items that are all healthy. And ironically, what happens most often is people end up throwing out all those vegetables in 2 weeks when they expire because you never made it in the first place. And so the advice that I've always been told that I thought it's a helpful starting place is to start with substituting just one item in your shopping cart with a healthier alternative. If you're usually going in there and getting whole milk, maybe consider getting 2% or fat-free. Things like that where it's not a radical change. And ideally, with the substitution, you're getting an item that's fairly similar to what you're already used to cooking with. That way, you're less likely to have it be wasted at the end of the 2 weeks or however long it's been. Some other things I always encourage is especially when it comes to things like ADHD medications or other kind of caffeine or kind of stimulant things, those can really suppress diet. And for some people, that can make eating enough calories in a day a challenge. So I always encourage try to plan your meals around diet suppressors, whether that's coffee in the morning, any kind of stimulant medications, or sometimes other medications can also make us a little bit less hungry. I think like most Americans tend to fall on the other end of the spectrum where eating too much is the challenge. And in those cases, the advice I've been told is always try to eat a little bit more fiber. That results in you feeling more full. So the desire to eat more food is less. And of course, drinking more water. And the similar effect, it's going to make your stomach feel more full. These last two, I'm sure we could have a whole presentation just on the idea of mindful eating and the dangers of distracted eating. But I'd like to throw it out briefly because, especially in today's day and age, more and more people are eating meals in front of the TV. Maybe they're on their phone as they're eating. And one risk of that is that we're not being mindful of how our body is responding to the food we're putting into it. The most common example of this is maybe we become full, but we don't really notice because we're so caught up in the TV show we're watching or the movie or whatever is kind of being entertaining in front of us. And so it's always a nice idea to try to start mindful eating. What this basically means is to be intentional start to finish, both with what you're preparing, how much you're consuming, and as you actually are consuming it, the way you're doing it. Are you doing it with distractions around you, or are you savoring every bite? Are you enjoying the food that you're actually preparing for yourself? These are kind of just a few ways to start thinking about nutrition and making some small changes in your life. But I'll keep it moving. I think another part of it is sleep. This is something that whenever I meet with a new client, I always kind of joke it's the most important question I could possibly ask you related to mental health. Because sleep really, I mean, it influences everything, even cognitive function, mood. It even influences kind of physical reactivity, which I'll talk about in just a second. It's kind of interesting.
Yes.
But to define what good sleep is, or at least parts of it, at least according to the United States, they encourage for most adults. Now, older adults are a little different, younger adults are a little different, but for most average adults, 7 to 8 hours is what they encourage people to sleep each night. Kind of add to this that they encourage people to turn off electronics, particularly those with screens, for 30 minutes prior to going to bed. An important part of this is your sleep routine, so consistency is really important here. Certain things like alcohol and big meals, like activating your digestive tract right before bed, can really impact sleep. They also mentioned to reduce fluids, and that's mostly because if you consume too many fluids, then you're likely to have disrupted sleep due to waking up and needing to go to the restroom halfway through the night. And of course, going for cooler temperatures. The body, it tends to sleep better when it's dark, when it's cool. So these are kind of the United States encouragements for how to kind of maximize sleep. I took it a step further. Actually, Reese, I think you were about to say something. I'll let you
Yeah,
chime in.
this is something that I did not appreciate in general, I think until I had kids. But in in modern life and as busy as we all get, I think it's just grossly underappreciated. I've done much better with my sleep tracking it, with I do wear a device because it's been important to me to see how much sleep and then more importantly the phases are you getting into REM sleep cycles and so forth. Um, your brain is clearing out. What is it? Your lymphatic system. Like when you go to
Mhm.
sleep, your brain and all the fluid running through your spine and brain is being detoxed and cleared out. And when we do not provide our brains with that restorative time, it really has an impact over time on people. And I felt that myself. And it's usually one of the things if I have to gut check myself, if I'm starting to slip up, not feel great, well, how was my sleep? That's usually one of the key things that, I was like, yeah, I could have done better about that. Right. And so I just cannot harp on this enough, how important this is. And specifically for me, after I do an infusion, I look forward to this because it's some of the best sleep I'll get is in those days coming after it. Right. So just very underappreciated health component, I think, in general. But when it comes to mental health, it's something I think we don't talk about as much.
Completely agree. And especially, I'm thinking back to like my college years too, where sleep is almost the butt end of a joke at times, where you have so much stuff to do. And not that it changes once you leave college, but I think a lot of times people, the first thing they might sacrifice is their sleep when it comes to physical health. Some research that I thought was actually really fascinating, and I'll share the source on both of these in just a second in case you're curious to learn more outside of this video. But there was a really fascinating study, one done on basketball players, and they found that when they focused on repaying sleep debt, so people that frequently were sleeping less, when they encouraged them to increase their sleep to 9 to 10 hours in an attempt to kind of pay back that sleep debt, as they put it, they found that the basketball players' response time on the court was increased by 12%. There was also some interesting, like 3-point shots were increased by like 9% accuracy. There's all these kind of interesting findings around it. And they really emphasize, especially not just for people kind of coming out of a difficult time, but those that really want to optimize and get the most out of their brain function. Maybe they have a really high intensity job or high aspirations for themselves. If you're trying to get that extra 1 or 2% to get the edge on the competition, this is where a lot of that can come, is things like sleep. They even found that increasing sleep for just 15 minutes, which seems so insignificant. I mean, for a lot of people, that's the time your snooze alarm goes off for. But even for 15 minutes, they noticed that many student test scores were increasing from B to A, which was really fascinating, kind of leaning towards maybe it helps in retention of information or in recollection of information the following day. That research and a lot more, if you want to find it, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, can be found on this video. I'm actually a really big fan of it. It's kind of, I think it's interesting to learn about how sleep can be used to optimize results. But in case you were curious to learn more about it, that's something to dive into.
Awesome.
But if we actually work to make a change here, like if we're trying to improve our sleep, where do we start? I think the few things that I was able to glean that might be helpful for you to take away from this call would be that every person's different. Even 15 minutes has been found to significantly improve or cause problems for people's sleep and restfulness. And so if you're going to bed every night and it's consistent and you're finding that it's not feeling restful, one thing you could do is to consider adjusting your sleep or your wake time by about 15 minutes. They encourage you to do that for a number of days, see how it feels. If it's not feeling good, then further adjust it by 15 minutes. But instead of trying to do larger increments, kind of the key part here is that even 15 minutes has been found useful. And so it's a worthwhile change to try out. The other thing that a lot of times people don't always consider, but especially in newer phones today, sometimes they're even built in with this, is having a bedtime alarm. It's essentially something to go off that signals to you, okay, if I'm watching a show or on my phone, maybe I put my phone down, maybe I start my bedtime routine and start winding down for the evening.
Yeah. I
That
mean,
one is going to be really helpful, especially for people that are busy. I think it'd
yes.
be helpful to use technology to our advantage here.
Yeah, I've dialed in my iPhone to where it gives me that kind of wind down notification. And we noticed it even with my kids, Trevor. We
Yeah,
about an hour before bed, screens are off and we get the wind down, and that's much easier than them, watching their shows or playing their little games till 10 or 15 minutes before bed. It goes way easier, right? So having that time to wind
yeah,
down is
exactly.
yeah. And there's
So,
something too about what I have found with this is that the human brain craves repetition and habit, and getting good sleep hygiene is crucial. And this isn't something, you mentioned that sleep debt. I used to be of that mindset, like, hey, I can cruise on 4 or 5 hours a night during the weeknights, maybe catch up on the weekend. And there's a lot of data around that you cannot repay that debt as
right,
well as you would hope,
right.
right? And so just being intentional about this, and for me, being able to be really intentional about a breathing exercise before I go down, and some stretching. Those are things that help me get to that space where I'm not, having trouble going down.
Yeah. Which, I mean, speaking of both those things you just said, like the stretching and exercise in general, I found it really interesting. So, the part of the reason, I mean, one, there's an activation of the body when we work out and exercise, but they actually emphasize another part of it I thought was interesting was how body temperature influences your ability to sleep. That can obviously raise with exercise, but it also raises even with showering, which for some people can be relaxing. They talk about how it's really important to shower 1.5 hours before bed so your body's internal temperature has an opportunity to go back down to its normal level because what you want when you sleep is the cave-like environment, essentially dark, cold. And if your body is really hot, it's going to be working the opposite direction of that. And so having that cold environment when you go to bed and making sure your body is cooler too by showering, 1.5 hours before bed or more is definitely the recommendation there. And the last part you're mentioning, kind of like the meditation or breathing or things like that. They say the phrasing they use is to process thoughts outside of bed for 10 minutes before you go to bed to avoid laying down with your head on the pillow and having racing thoughts in bed. Now, process thoughts is such a buzzword, especially for me as a therapist. But some of the things that I might encourage to do alone would be some people find that simply sitting on the couch and just kind of mentally running through the important things on their mind is enough. For a lot of people, that doesn't actually help. For a lot of people, that can make anxieties even greater. And so I always like to encourage if we're trying to slow down the mind's pace, consider journaling. The reason why, and it kind of dawned on me after a therapist had told me this, the benefits of journaling are that you have to slow your thoughts down to the pace of which your pen can write. Usually, your thoughts can move a mile a minute. And so, one of the biggest benefits of journaling is that you can actually process and think through thoughts without having them jump and skip tracks so quickly because you have to move at the pace you're writing. But these are some things that might be helpful if you're trying to improve your sleep in the near future. Exercise. I feel like a lot of people dread this one. The United States guidelines are currently set at 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardio this could be like a brisk walk. It doesn't need to be like running or any high intensity things. They also say that even like raking leaves, for example, or vacuuming the house might qualify as this moderate intensity. They say 150 minutes per week is what's encouraged, or you can do half that time if it's high intensity, if you're running and kind of doing more extreme things. And they encourage 2 days a week of, they call it strengthening, but they describe it as just doing any activity that's a little harder than your usual. It doesn't need to be a full-blown bench press or kind of formalized gym workout. Just anything that results in you exerting strength more than you typically do would meet the United States requirements on this one. In case you're feeling discouraged, just so you know, you're also not alone. As of 2016, which is this pretty outdated data, and actually I'm really curious to see when it comes out again where the results are at, just because I feel like the pandemic has changed the nature of a lot of people's work.
Sure.
I might even suspect that these numbers are even worse in today's day and age. But at least back in 2016, they found that only less than a third of men and less than 20% of women did not meet these guidelines, did not get 150 minutes of cardio and 2 days of strength. And in fact, over half of the time spent awake, on average, at the time of 2016, about 7.7 hours were spent completely sedentary for Americans. And so there really is an importance to do something. And that kind of leads really naturally into kind of how do we make this change? It doesn't take much. In fact, the government even encourages just adding 5 minutes of activity has been shown to have real health benefits. You know, if we're breaking down that kind of, we talked about it a second ago, that 150 minutes of cardio, if we break that down, that basically means you got to walk 1 mile in 20 minutes, about 2,000 steps every day. It's not a radical amount. That's less than most every TV show nowadays. If you don't do it every single day, you could always do walking 2 miles every other day if that works easier for your schedule. And keep in mind that like yard work and housework counts for this too. You know, even if we're just vacuuming or raking the leaves or something like that.
This goes back to, if you do track, if you do have a wearable, an Apple Watch or Fitbit or something,
Yeah,
you'd be surprised how much you might be moving around throughout the day anyway, right? And so it
exactly.
may not be this full mile, right? I've incorporated this for me, Trevor. I try to do like a mile walk in the morning around 9 o'clock after I've done a few calls. But the real intentional one for me every day is after lunch. Like right after lunch, I try to walk for 15, 20 minutes. I really struggled with like that blood sugar crash and needing coffee at 2 or 3
Yeah.
every day, right? And that has helped tremendously. That walk, there's data behind it. I just pulled up an article before the session here. It said even walking for 2 minutes, two
Mhm.
minutes after a meal helps with your blood sugar. And so that is something that I've adopted that really has made a difference for me on a daily basis. I'm not drinking near as much coffee, which is allowing me to not be as anxious at the end of the day and
Yeah,
not have as many racing thoughts, right? All these things play together. So,
exactly. And when I talk to people, I think more often than not, the reason people don't exercise is because of fatigue, because they're exhausted, their sleep's not feeling restful, they don't have the energy to exercise. And so that's part of the reason I'm sharing this in conjunction with ketamine treatments, is because more likely than not, you're going to start feeling better throughout this treatment. And as Reese pointed out, a lot of people get really restful sleep after they go through an infusion. And so I'm sharing this information to kind of share that we don't need to shoot for the stars and do like the craziest of workouts and get a gym membership and all of that. This starts with 5 minutes of walking, or even as a study Reese just shared, just 2 minutes of walking. Well, we really don't need to go super high with this. Starting somewhere is all we can ask. And of course, if you are meeting those requirements, the government also mentions that even more, if we double that, if we were to do, let's say, like 2 miles in 40 minutes every day instead of 1 mile in 20 minutes every day, that they notice the health benefit is significantly increased when we do even more cardio.
yeah. Trevor, it took me 38 years of living to get to the point to where I started actually after I came in as a patient and went through infusions. I started riding my bike again on the road, doing some longer
Mhm.
distances. And it was after that that I finally got to where I would like enjoy that physical
Yeah,
exertion. And I realized, hey, at about 20, 30 minutes into an hour-long ride, that this is really pleasurable and I feel better afterwards. But it took 6 months of really, putting in the work before I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about when you hear these people talk about like a runner's high or like getting that enjoyment out of the physical activity. And there was an audiobook I was listening to. It talked about willpower and discipline and the importance of when you feel that desire not to complete, even if you can just get on, even when you're not feeling like you want to ride that day, if you can just get yourself on there and get on the bike, if you can get 5% of it done, that really starts to help push your brain in the right direction in terms of combating that kind of bad side of that, if you will.
Yes. And that, what I'm about to say, I imagine is suspected by a lot of people, but I'm yet to find any research that can say definitively this is the case. But a lot of people and humans in general seem to be adverse to change. And so that change from like not exercising to walking to go from sedentary to motion, that transitionary period is where a lot of people, I think, find the biggest struggle. More often, I pretty rarely hear about somebody putting on workout clothes, walking into a gym, and then saying, I don't want to do it, and walking out.
Yeah.
Once you're there and prepared and ready, usually you're going to follow through with it. And so if I was working with somebody that was really struggling to exercise and go on walks, let's say, I would encourage them to, okay, can you put your shoes on right now? Do that. Can you get to the other side of the front door? Do that. And now what do you want to do? Because at that point in time, once you have the shoes on, once you're outside of the house, you might as well do it. You're already there. It's pretty rare that people would walk back inside
Right.
at that point in time.
Yeah.
But
Good stuff, man.
we'll just run through a couple more really fast. I think, technology, I actually found this really interesting. The United States does not have any official guidelines for adults on technology. They do have guidelines for young children and for kind of school-age children, but the general recommendation, at least for the older school-age children, is to limit screen time to 2 hours or less outside of your required time, which I thought was kind of an interesting way of specifying it.
Yeah.
This can be tricky, especially for people like myself that are, remote workers most of the time. You typically go from the medium-sized screen to then you look at the little screen on your phone, and then you look at the big screen at the TV, and you kind of just alternate different screens. And so it can be really, really helpful to try to limit that. And some of the ways that you can limit this that I think are kind of easily digestible would be to consider alternatives to video media. Maybe you're into podcast or music, kind of things that don't require your full attention that allow you to do other stuff and then just listen to. Kind of exactly as Reese was just saying, I think it's one of the best things we can possibly do is to bookend a work day or an important task with a walk or something that isn't technology focused. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's reading a book for a second, but something to signal I'm done with this activity, I'm pulling back from technology, and then I'll re-enter into whatever I want to do later on in the evening. Along with this, I mean, removing phone apps, the things that maybe you're commonly spending time on, social media is usually the big kicker here, and forcing yourself to access those on a computer instead. Most people find they use them much less often if you have to go on the
No,
computer to check it.
this is something that I'm very passionate about, given my kind of technology background and um, just the evolution that we've seen over our lifetime of
Yes.
landline phones to now these full-blown computers that you can carry in your pocket. And there's a lot of compelling data around that when people want to look at limiting their screen time, even changing like there's a color scale, there's a gray scale you can put
Yes.
your phone in at night, and that helps with that compulsion desire to that. And the thing I want to tell our audience here is like if you're going through ketamine assisted therapy, if you're working on yourself, it has been my experience. There's a ton of data around this. Social media use first thing in the morning or in the evening is not great and kind of hijacks your dopamine system, right? And so
Correct.
I just want to make a call out to that if you are working on yourself and we're all guilty of it, or maybe we're not, I certainly am. If you can retrain your brain to not look at your phone for the net first 30 minutes to an hour of a day, which is a thing that I have done here that is it has helped my life significantly. And furthermore, once you do start using that device, not diving into social media and the short form video, and just know that like every one of those social media companies, every one of those app developers, your attention is currency and they are trying to pull that in their direction,
Yes.
right? So take command of that, know that your attention is valuable and what you focus on is where your efforts are going to go. And so that's been something for me and for people around me that I've seen, that when we start to talk about these things, I kind of pry into that, like, what's your social media use look like? What's the routine on that? Because it is very easy for us to go on autopilot after a long week and you wake up on a Saturday morning and you're scrolling, right? And now like an hour of the day has passed by and it's like, what did I gain out of this? Right. So something I'm guilty of and always working to improve on. And I just want to call it out to the audience because I think it's an area where, in the through the lens of mental health and being the best version of ourselves, probably a good place for us all to check out.
Exactly. One of my favorite descriptor words of social media apps is that they're sticky. They're meant to be, once you touch it, you can't pull away. It's
Yeah.
going to suck you into it. There are, interestingly though, and I'll be honest, I haven't tested these out, but I've seen a lot of literature on it and things popping up. Uh, Apps like Freedom is the first one that
Yeah.
popped up,
Yeah.
not sponsored by it, but there's a bunch of these sorts of apps that essentially will temporarily lock your certain apps or programs. So like maybe Facebook or something like that is locked for a set amount of time. And some of them, I think I saw for Freedom is really interesting. You actually can't forcibly unlock the app in that time, and also you can't delete the app that's locking it. So
Yeah.
there's not like some kind of like, oh, I really want to get on it, whatever, I'll just delete it. You can't really wiggle your way around. It's meant to be a barrier that is self-imposed by yourself, to avoid those apps. Another thing that people don't always consider is the value of, if you have to charge your phone, charge it in a different room than the one that you're at.
Yeah. That's huge. That's huge. Um,
If it's
that,
not right in front of
that
you, you're not
station
likely
at
to grab
night,
it.
having it right next to your, yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Awesome.
So I guess if we pull all of this together, and if we kind of take all of this in one gulp, these are my challenges for you. If you're coming out of ketamine treatment and things that you might want to be improving your lifestyle and things like that, I'll give you two versions. I'll give you a low intensity. So if you're only willing to bite off a little bit or only able to bite off a little bit, my encouragement for you would be, next time you go to the store, substitute one item in your cart. That's all you got to do. Just one item, start the change. If you don't yet have a bedtime alarm, try using a bedtime alarm. If you do, try turning off electronics like the TV and the computer in front of you when it goes off and actually sticking to it. Start with 5 minutes of activity each day. It can be a short walk, it doesn't need to be a lot of it. And try to challenge yourself for, after the workday is complete, spending 10 minutes without your phone. For a lot of people, you'll actually be surprised how nice this is. Because a lot of people I find tend to check their phone at the end of the day because maybe there's a last message that somebody sent them, maybe there's something they forgot to get to. But giving yourself the freedom to get out of work for a second and be actually free in what you choose to do and spend your time on, instead of tethered to the phone and all the activities from earlier in the day. That's the low intensity challenge. If you're looking to push yourself a little further, I might even encourage you to eat one vegetable or one fruit each day, which I know sounds a bit silly, but for a lot of us, that is not what we're currently doing. So try to eat one vegetable or one fruit each day. Try to practice a regular bedtime routine for a week in a row. So the difficult challenge here is going to be to persist it over time. In addition to that, try to walk each day for 30 minutes. And you could even experiment with deleting apps or commonly used apps temporarily so you can spend less time on your phone. But my hope is that if you're watching this video and you see this, maybe you could even take a little picture of the slide and try to challenge yourself after your next infusion to kind of improve these aspects of lifestyle that'll then further improve your mental health down the line and ensure that all of these results we achieve are sustained, which is what we want.
Awesome.
That's what I got for you. Of
Trevor, thank you so much, man. Wealth of
course.
knowledge. Um, for our audience that's here, I just want to reiterate what Trevor is mentioning here, and we will send the slide deck out so everyone has a copy of this as well. That it's, you know, in this spirit of self-improvement, working on ourselves, working on our mental health, we talked about a lot.
We
And
did.
if our audience was able to integrate any one of these things into their post ketamine treatment, SOPs, it's going to be a win. And so that's the big thing I want to tell our audience as well is that um, consistent habitual change isn't an overnight thing. If you can add these exercise, a couple of minutes of exercise this week and maybe next week bring it up a minute or two, it's that positive. And in going through ketamine assisted therapy and opening up your mind with neuroplasticity, you will retrain your brain to be accepting and be rewarding of these things. Hey, I'm enjoying this sunlight and this walk and this peacefulness that I'm getting without the phone. And just bringing all this together at the end of the day, all we're hoping to do is give every one of our patients better quality of life. And so with that, I want to thank our audience for being here today. Trevor, I want to thank you for all of the useful information. Please do stay tuned to our channels, and we will be putting out some more content in the very near future. All right. I wish you all a great rest of your day. And Trevor, thank you again so much, and we'll see you next time, man.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye.